It's one thing to manage the stage for a 1-hour webinar, but what about a 3-day seminar or workshop or conference? Hello and welcome to Multi-Day Virtual Workshops, Tips for Producers. My name is Roger Courville, and welcome to another episode of Thought Leader Conversations, sponsored by the crew here at Virtual Venues, where you can give yourself a promotion, instantly scaling your virtual and hybrid event production teams so you can nail your own goals and your strategy and focus on the important things for you. But we're not here to talk about me or us per se, because I've got with me a fellow industry old-timer, Rob McArthur, and he and I go way, way back. Rob, you may recall from previous times that we've chatted, Rob was in the physical events and trade show business before going virtual in 2004. He joined in I forget how early. He was like employee number 3 or something like that at this company that I co-founded when we left Microsoft called Courville, and went from startup to exit. And he went on to manage the teams at Intercall, which is now, or was then Intrado and then Notified. Went on to manage one of the largest virtual event producer teams in the world. Rob, welcome. And hey, before we get into this, any place you'd like to fill in some gaps? Tell me a little more about your who you are and what you do.
Yeah, no, you kind of saved me from a life at Microsoft. No disrespect to Microsoft, but I know that our paths didn't cross until after you left the Microsoft world, and then you kind of reached in generously and pulled me out of that into the Corbett world. So it definitely set me on a trajectory. So I have always appreciated that.
So, what we're here to talk about today, you and I both work with clients who have moved in-person 3-day seminars, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, online, right? That's a full 24 hours of classes and interactions and all kinds of crazy. And that's, of course, a whole lot different than doing webinars for 45 minutes plus a little Q&A. So my question to you, maybe to kick things off, what's the first thing that comes to mind if you had someone wondering what it takes to pull off moving a 3-day workshop or seminar online?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me back up just a second. So when when COVID hit, everybody moved online, and so I think the prevailing wisdom was don't break anything. Just get the content as best you can out to the virtual audience. We have to continue our business. And so when the 3-day, the 24 hours in 3 days, the 20, I think that we did one for 30 hours over 3.5 days. Um, at first it was triage. And then as COVID started to settle down and things began to reopen, we really had to stop and think like, okay, people are used to this now. This part of our event economy has now been fully developed. People are understanding the efficiencies from a cost perspective and from a logistics perspective to do things online. So how can we really build an approach that that will be sustainable, that will still give both the presenters, the sponsoring companies, and most importantly, the attendees, the value that everybody deserves. So, Roger, if you ask me where to start, I think it has to start at what the client is trying to accomplish. This is the most important thing. So, a client comes to us, comes to me, and says, "Hey, we've got a message we've got to get out. And we think it's going to take this long," and it's like timeout. What's the result? What's the end result? Is it a certification process? Is it a 10 on your NPS score? Is it positive survey comments? What is it what is it that would be successful for you at the end of the program, and then work backwards from there? And then there's a whole bunch of work that you have to do and have to begin at that point. That'd be my very short answer.
No, I love where you started with that, though, because you just made a great point with regard to the context of how we even ended up here, right? I mean, we're staring down 2024, and it wasn't that long ago, and actually we still run into it, but it wasn't that long ago when people were like, what, 3-day seminar online? No way, right? No way. And it wasn't even given a second thought. Now, I mean, it was a lot of years ago. I remember doing like a 5-day event for IBM. This is actually when we were still Microsoft. And this is 20 years ago. We did a 5-day event online. And to be fair, that was pretty awful. But that was a long time. It was a long time ago. And you make a great point. And then COVID hits, and people, whether they're running conferences or it is like seminar companies or educational companies going, hey, we do these continuing medical education programs and we bring doctors to Boston or San Francisco for 3 days and do blah, blah, blah. They literally were out of business overnight if they didn't figure out how to move this kind of stuff online. Oddly enough, some of them have really succeeded, and I've seen more than one who have come back and went, oh, you know what? Our clients actually kind of like this because they get to go home and sleep in their own bed, and they can take their dog for a walk and, at lunch breaks. And I'm not saying it's the only answer, but I've seen massive transformation with regard to some people who thought no effing way.
To really giving it some consideration. I mean, there's no catering bill. I mean, there can be. You can actually bring in some lunch for your virtual audience. That's a whole thing. But we probably won't get into that level of detail today. But there's no catering bill. There's no pipe and drape. There's no AV company. There's no facility to rent. There's some huge advantages. The most of which being it's easier for your presenters and easier for your attendees to attend online, but it puts a lot of responsibility on the host company and people that do the work that we do, Roger, because we have to make good on the promises of people being able to network, communicate. I'll use your word to maintain that connectedness that you get when you're face to face. And how do we do that? How do we bring in those human elements to something that is it's not inhuman, but it's
It can be. Well, it can be,
yeah,
right? I mean, I've often said talk with, not at,
yeah,
right? And that was
yeah.
my part of my teaching virtual presenters how to present, and it's useful, I think, for us to remember that we're not connecting to, we're not connecting through, and it's a no-brainer with the technology we grew up with, like talking on the telephone, and yet somehow we move into Zoom, and now everything we know about human connectedness and conversation and connecting has just gone out the door. I love what you just said, pipe and drape. I haven't heard that in quite a while, but then it's been a while since I've been at a company that did an
It's
in-person trade
terrifying.
show.
Roger, let me ask you a question. So, because you just brought it up, and I think it's critical. Like, how do you prepare? How do you prepare a group of presenters? Hopefully, it's not just one presenter over 3 days. Hopefully, it's a team of people that are going to collaborate and communicate amongst themselves and deliver the content over that long a period of time. But what are some things that you kind of talk to your clients about from a presentation perspective?
You just heard my language about connecting through versus connecting to, right? Talking with instead of talking at. So if that for me is the starting place, because that's what we want in any conference, even in person, right? I mean, I can't tell you the last time I spoke at a conference who said, hey, it's just okay if you just stand up and be a talking head. No, they want even big keynotes in person to be interactive and an experience. So to me, if the basic premise is talking with, not at, and how are we going to connect, the first thing that I think we have to prepare presenters to do is to say, how is their platform, whatever you happen to be using, Zoom or WebEx or whatever, how do you set that up so that it is a dashboard so that at a glance, and I literally call them at a glance tools, so that at a glance, a presenter can see the proxy of what's going on in the audience, right? Sometimes there's too much reliance on cameras, right? You and I can have a camera. We can have 15 people on camera. We can have a whole bunch more than that on camera. But the minute I then go to share my desktop, now all of a sudden my view changes and maybe I get this other little view and presenters go, oh no. And so they start talking at instead of talking with, because what they haven't done is prepare prepared themselves by saying, once I move into that modality, how do I see chat? Do I need to see cameras, or is there another way to do that? Here's one example, right? I mean, the default that I hear from presenters is, hey, give me a show of hands, right? And somehow they're trying to put their view, their conferencing, their software view into something where they can see if people actually physically raised their hands, which still has a limit of 25 or 50 cameras at the max, right? Depending on what you're doing, as opposed to going, I've got this other little tool that tells me that 83 of the 119 people here raised their hand. That is a whole lot more useful if you think about using your tools as a dashboard, like the dashboard in your car. And so I think for me, one of them is saying, what do you do? What do you do when you're in person? How do you connect and interact? What do you do if there's a spontaneous question that someone shouts from the middle of the room? Where are those interactions formal versus informal? Formal meaning I know when I get to this place in the program, I've planned to do this type of interaction, ask for a show of hands, pass out a handout, or turn to your neighbor and tell them a funny joke or something, right? That's the formal. Informal is stuff that just happens. And honestly, that's where the magic happens, right? When peer-to-peer connection happens, and when we have a chance to facilitate that. And it's not hard online, but it is different. And you got to take time to think through that. So to me, when I work with a client that has multiple presenters, I usually ask for permission to do that on a one-on-one basis so that I can assess where they're at. Because the number one thing that people hate, it's why people hate public speaking, let alone doing it online. Nobody wants to look stupid, right? And literally this happened last weekend. Somebody who I know, because I've worked with her many times, knows cold how to just move into sharing her screen, was using an extra monitor, and PowerPoint was coming up with, the presenter view instead of the full screen view. And she knows it cold. She's done it 1,000 times, and for some reason it was coming up. And what happens when that kind of thing happens is your adrenaline starts pumping, your voice gets shallow, you forget stuff that you thought you knew really well. And so I think working with each individual presenter and understanding where they're at, where they're comfortable, what their fears are, and saying, how do I help you be better than you are?
Yeah.
I'm here. I got your back.
Roger, just to pick up on that point, glitches happen, right? Things go wrong. Routers in Tallahassee, Florida, go down, and there's really nothing you can do about that. But it's how the presenters react to those things, whether it's a screen share or a garbled audio or whatever it might be, can either be a real human moment that can kind of propel the conference forward, or it can be a moment of fatigue. And what I mean by fatigue is that if your presenter is poorly lit, or is on a bad camera, or it's hard to hear them, or they react to issues that come up, real or perceived issues, if they react incorrectly or poorly to them, it causes the attendee to be tired. They've got to spend calories going like, oh, what's wrong here? Is it my audio? Is it this? And it's just harder to hear. So when those little glitches happen, it can be a real human moment, or it can be a moment of fatigue. And I think some one-on-one coaching and some training and some time and attention to your presentation team can do a lot for your conference, where it might be something that's just like, oh, well, they've been on Zoom before, so we're just going to run for 3 days now. That's common. But taking a little, you know what I mean? Taking a little extra time.
Nailed it. Yes.
Yeah. So, because one thing is not like the other.
Well, I mean, attendees have that same thing too, right? They show up going, oh, this is just like Zoom. I've been on lots of Zooms, or go to, or pick your platform, right? Oh, I've done this 1,000 times. And what they've never really experienced is what it means to go into a breakout and to use maybe some tools of interaction or collaboration. Are you asking them to use a whiteboard, or to mute and unmute, or handle their video in a different way, or, and it's amazing how many of those little things sometimes even trip up attendees. So let's talk for a second about, not about how do we support the event the company putting on the event. Let's talk about supporting that end attendee to help them have a great experience. How do
Yeah,
producers, well, I'll just ask you this. How do producers and live event moderators help attendees be
y-
successful?
yeah. It's great and often overlooked. A lot of. I just speak from like I have graying hair, lots of years of experience of producing events, and the attendee is so often overlooked. It's a focus on, okay, let's get the registration site up. Okay, what is the messaging out to the attendee? Okay, then we've got our block of people. Now we can just run a show and hopefully practice a little bit and then jump on and we're good to go. Um, the attendee needs to be brought along with that process too. And I think one of the things that is challenging is that sense of community. And a lot of Roger, what you talk about is building. You talked about a little bit a minute ago about building that connectedness. I just love that term of yours. And that can start before the event. Familiarize your attendees with what the platform is, and even if they've done 1,000 of them, you can spend a little bit of time. It can be asynchronous, it can be live, whatever you have the time or the ability to do, is get them familiar with what their experience is going to be ahead of the conference. And then once you get them to the conference, it starts in the waiting room, and you go through um, uh, just like you would in a live conference, right? You go through some conversation, some icebreakers, um, break up the monotony with different things for them to do, and that can be different things for them to look at, different things for them to type, different things for them to listen to, whether it's sound effects or music or whatever the case may be. But give your attendees a fighting chance by creating a real dynamic um, initial experience just as they get into the meeting, and you'll see that come through with their level of satisfaction. Um, I don't know, just my initial thoughts there, Roger. Get let me have the same question right back to you.
You know, well, here's some historical context. I remember eons back, and we were acquired by Placeware, and then Placeware was acquired by Microsoft, and so we're the virtual event production team at Microsoft, right? And I remember, I remember the day, or essentially the week, that Microsoft decided that frontline or first touch event support didn't make any sense, right? Oh, that's too expensive to provide, right? Meaning Rob's invited to an event for some reason. Rob's having trouble with the whatever, and therefore, and Rob, the phone number that Rob calls to say an event attendee, the phone number that Rob calls is was would come directly to a team that was part of our team that knew exactly, here are the events that we're producing, here are the details needed for each and every event, and is it a logistical issue, is it a technical issue, is it a Rob just doesn't know how to use a computer issue, whatever that, right? That was where we were at. And then they went like, no, we just need everybody to call the regular tech support call number. And I just remember a whole division of people who were crestfallen, because they're like, no, that's not how we take care of people in events, right? This isn't just a piece of software. And one of the things that we know from knew back then, and it's still true today, is that most attendee challenges aren't a tech support issue, not in a direct, here's a technical problem issue. Most of the time it's pretty solvable. You know what? Most of the time it's pretty solvable if you just reinstall the software or restart your computer. You're just done. But I mean, I've had people, and I'm talking literally this year, 2023. Here as we record this, it's November. I've had people this year who I give out my personal number and personal contact info with one of the clients that I support with these 3-day things, so they can contact me directly. And somebody's like, calls me and goes, I can still hear, but Zoom just disappeared. What? What? Zoom just disappeared. Well, I can still hear. Okay, so Zoom's still connected. What had happened is they had clicked on a browser, and a browser window was on top of their Zoom player, and they didn't
Yeah.
even realize at the most basic level what it might mean to have two applications open on their
Right.
computer.
Right.
And this person was a doctor, right? So not stupid, different realm of experience and where their day-to-day was, right? So I think it's really useful when we think about how to answer that question. How do we help attendees be successful? One is, if you're the company producing the event, is to think through what your commitment is to, because, more support versus less support is more expensive versus less expensive. And is the company you're working with do you have dedicated event support would be one thing. But then at the next level is, well, then during the live event, what is the nature of how we, as the backstage people, troubleshoot or participate or see how, do we notice somebody having an issue and actively or proactively pursue them? For instance, and I'll use Zoom as an example because it literally happened to me this last weekend. Somebody's camera was on, but in Zoom, it showed the little X that showed that it recognized that they had a camera, but it wasn't connecting, meaning the camera was probably in use by another application or something. And what do? I see. I could send this person a private chat going, hey, here's what I see is going on for you. And here's what you can do about it. We got a break coming up in 10 minutes when you can restart your computer. And just being proactive like that was huge. Sometimes, depending on the platform, you as the producer can tell what somebody's bandwidth is like. And if somebody's really struggling with bandwidth, helping them through that. And of course, the same has to do with audio, or you see them routinely exiting and coming back in. Oftentimes they're disconnecting, not because they're disconnecting, but because they're getting disconnected because they're on a really crappy internet connection or something.
Right.
I guess
Right.
the question then is, how can we help them be successful? The first to me is, are you aware? Are you proactive? And to me, if you're an end client thinking about how to produce or whether or not to work with somebody like Rob's company or V2, are you willing to make an investment in your attendees having a great experience? Because the problem isn't the 98% of them that all had a great experience just by logging in. The problem is you've got another few percent who can't find their browser, or who just are on a crummy internet connection and there's nothing they can do about it, or they don't know what they can do about it. And are we going to help them have a great experience? And it's amazing how much you can do for people. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be rocket science.
And a huge differentiator, just doing the things that you just talked about there. If you can, an attendee might not, or a presenter, I'm going to switch over to the presenter group, they might not be aware that their audio is garbled. They might not know. And so having somebody that can very, very efficiently troubleshoot without interrupting the flow of the conference can be a huge difference maker in the success of a program.
Well, and
I
I'll add this. It's wrong to assume that you solve that problem the early first part of the conference and it's all done and figured out. We'll use one example that you and I are both familiar with, working with a client who does 3-day continuing medical education programs, right? So these doctors are showing up. They're not dumb. In fact, they're radically smart, right? But they have differing levels of experience. And depending on where they're joining from, they have all of these issues that we were just talking about. And then that happens on Friday, and then on Saturday morning, what happens? Oh, most of the time they go from joining from the office to joining from home. And sometimes we're repeating that same kind of thing. And they're like, oh, it works okay when we stream Netflix. Not quite. I don't have any idea why it's taken so dang long to do the Zoom breakout. And that's when you can be part of their guiding their experience.
Totally. And and the benefit to them is one, problems can get fixed. I'm gonna do a little plug here, Roger. But they can just focus on delivering a great event and consuming a great event. A good event producer can handle, I'm gonna steal another one of your lines, can get the technology out of the way so that the learning can happen. And I think it's a really valuable. And people, what I've found is that people that use production, I'm gonna stop this shameless plug in just a second. People that use production tend to reuse production. That they see that value, and it can be really helpful. If, again, going back to the very first thing that I said, if your mission is to have a great outcome, and we've established that, then these little things can either be human moments or they can be tragic moments for your event, to be a little dramatic there. Roger, and did I cut you off?
Go for
No.
it.
Okay. All right. So we just were talking about the technical role of an event producer. I kind of want to put you on the spot to talk about the dynamic role of an event producer, that extra voice that comes in, that can be something different than the sort of the rote presentations of the 4 or 5 people, hopefully a team of 4 or 5 if you're talking about a 3-day conference. I think any less than that's a little abusive on your presenters, but that's another opinion there. But what how can an event producer be part of the team? What are some things that you've seen work where the producer's an active participant in the program?
Well, I'm going to ask you the same question here momentarily, particularly since I know we've often worked together on complex programs, and we've worked with clients that do similar kinds of, like 3-day long complex programs. To me, if there is a beginning for answering the question of how active is that moderator, producer, backstage person, the beginning is trust. The great events that happen in the world of learning and conferences are not broadly publicly seen. So the paradigm that people show up with is the typical crappy webinar. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. And if you have any, we're going to do Q&A at the end. And if you ask a question in the middle, we're going to ignore you for 45 minutes. And
Thank you for
right,
attending.
right. Shoot me. Shoot me. Shoot me. So here's the thing. We do stuff online that suffers from Uncle Joe syndrome, right? Which is, that's what I call it. Uncle Joe knows how to play golf. I don't know how to play golf. I learned to golf with Uncle Joe, but what I don't realize is Uncle Joe is a hack. So I learned to hack too. And so we see this perpetuation of really crummy stuff in virtual events that comes from seeing lots of really crappy webinars that talk at you for 45 minutes and do things that we would never do in an in-person thing, in an in-person event, right? I mean, if you showed up to an in-person event and they said, oh, we're going to run this video for 45 minutes and then we'll take your questions at the end, you'd think you got ripped off. Why do we do that online? Well, I don't know, but that's another thing. So active versus passive participation on the part of the MC or the moderator or producer, whatever language you want to use, begins with understanding what that person's role is, which is to make the presenter better than they are, right? It's to keep the momentum going. Here's one example. If you run a poll, how long do you keep a poll up? For me, I never want to sit around and wait for that last vote to come in. I think about it like microwave popcorn. If you wait till the last piece of popcorn is popped, everything else is burnt, right?
Yeah.
it's the microwave popcorn principle. So you're running a poll and it's running, and two things are always true. One, for the presenter, that amount of time that passes feels really long, right? So do you step in and go, yep, all right, little thinking going on, couple more seconds. All right, here we go. Okay, here are your results. And then you share out the results, right? So you can kind of guide the process filling in what you know is going on in the hearts and minds of both the presenting team, but also then the attendees, and just gave them a verbal cue. All right, if you're thinking about which vote to put in, you better put it in now, right? The second is I usually close them up at about 80%.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one example, right? So whether it's how things get kicked off in the beginning, it's how things transition into or out of a breakout room, how you get into or out of a poll, how you transition between presenters, how you manage breaks and DJing music, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing is. To me, at the end of the day, the presenters should go, you just made my life easier, and I look better because of what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are
Yeah.
ever interjecting in a way that gets in the way, the MC is not the star of the show. The presenter's the star of the show. So the MC or the moderator should never be the center of attention. They should only be moving things forward. It's probably a long-winded way of putting that, but I have a few opinions.
Yeah, no, that's great. I concur, especially about the polls. The silence is deadly unless it's planned and specifically stated by the presenter that we're going to be quiet for a minute and then give me a ding when it's over, so I know. But if I'm an attendee and things go silent, automatically start thinking that something's wrong. That's going to create fatigue for me. So, yeah, and I totally agree, guys. Just a little. You said Uncle Joe. I'm gonna give you a little Uncle Rob. Polling is just to get a flavor of where your attendees are right then. If you really need to learn something from them, that's a survey. We could talk about that probably in
Ooh,
another
good point.
podcast. But the when Roger said roll up to 80%, that's you're going to get the information that you need for a well thought out poll question at that level. You're going to get a flavor of where the audience is, and then your presenters can work off that. I think that was great. Um, yeah, uh, Roger taught me early on that try and mimic the in-person event with the virtual event. So what happens at the beginning of a program? Um, we've all been on the conference like Roger just mocked, like, hi, my name is Rob. I'll be your event producer today. Don't exit the meeting, blah, 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 and then turn it over to the presenter. The way we start these conferences now is we start to build a community right from the beginning. We're communicating with people in the pre-conference. We're asking them questions. Hey, where are you from? Why are you here? What's your favorite color? Whatever. We're asking them for input on music. There's a few things that you want to bring in. You can be creative. A good MC will be creative with the music. Like if you go through something that's really tough subject matter or a long subject matter, you want to bring in some energy with the music, but you can also help the attendees feel connected by taking their requests. And so you kind of start to build that right at the beginning of the meeting. And I don't even in a long conference, I don't really open the meeting. The presenters, like Roger said, the
Right.
star of the meeting, they should get that. They should open and close the program. That's what the attendees are there. But I'll come in that opening sequence and give the attendees like some visuals, like here I am, I'm here, here's my role, and some fun stuff and some technical stuff, and then turn it right back over to the stars of the program. Throughout the event, I'll often just pop onto the audio if there's a spot. Again, I don't want to take the spotlight away from the presenter, but I'll come in if there's a lull, if there's a little spot, and say, "Hey guys, this is what we're going to do now," and I think we're going with Jenny, and that can help to sort of cover maybe a little bit of glitch in the run of show, or cover maybe a little bit of a technical issue. You can bring some personality and another sort of layer to the event.
Yeah. And one of the things that I know you've seen and I've seen, but I know a lot of potential people listening to this may not have seen because you don't sit on lots and lots, hundreds or thousands of events with lots of different clients. One of the things that we've seen is how people, meaning end attendees, transform over the course of that time when they realize two things. One, you're there to help them. And two, that this isn't going to be a passive stare at a screen while somebody info barfs over PowerPoint kind of experience. Right. And I actually have people thank me as the producer at the end, or ask me for my Spotify playlist, or, the tunes that we played during the breaks or whatever. And they realize that you're part of the show, even though you're not one of the presenters or faculty or the team members. And to me, the point isn't about me getting the recognition. It's about them realizing that you just put in a whole lot of work to do something very different than just talk over PowerPoint. And they've been part of an experience that would not be true if your virtual communication was the equivalent of a YouTube video. We don't have an experience with a YouTube video like that.
Right, right. And I think you hit it right on the head. It's creating an experience, not producing an event. It's creating an experience, and it's both the attendees, the sponsoring companies, and the presenters themselves. That's what we want at the end of the day. That's what the attendees really paying for. That's what the attendee, or either paying in money or paying in their time, and that's what they're going to remember. They're going to remember a, a free flowing. Well, you want this stuff pretty planned out. Let me just say that. But you want to be able to kind of free flow and be human within a very detailed plan. Is that a fair way to say that, Roger? If we just jump into the run of show end of things.
Yeah. So, Rob, let's talk about run of show. And some people might think of it as an agenda, but since we're here talking about longer programs, like a 3-day workshop that's entirely online with interactions and breakouts and all that kind of stuff, let's talk about planning in advance with the run of show. What are the best practices for the run of show for a virtual event or workshop?
Yeah, I'd say it's a tough one, and it's a very, very important one. I've done events without a run of show, and it's not so great. And then I've done events on the other side of the spectrum where every moment is planned, and there's people with, they're virtual, right? But I see them. They got the clipboard and the stopwatch. And you can over plan. You can make the event very dry and very dry is a good word. So I think the best practices are, take plenty of time with the run of show, right? Your subject matter experts, they know their content. Hopefully they have the materials, right? There's a whole bunch to talk about of materials. It's probably another podcast all by itself. But they're subject matter experts. Your producer knows the technology. So how do you bring those two together? And that's with the detailed run of show. And um, you want every single piece planned out, but you want some room in there for people to be able to kind of freestyle a little bit. And what we'll commonly do, especially on a long format program, a 2-day, a 3-day program, is we'll use the buffer of all the breaks. So we might instead of a 10-minute scheduled break, that might turn into 8 minutes if somebody freestyled a little bit too long, because that's where the content was going. That's where the questions were rich. And so you want it to be detailed and planned out, but flexible. And it's a little bit of a challenge, and it takes a little bit of practice to do that. But as we work with clients more and more, there are clients that are getting very, very good at detailed but flexible runs of show.
Yeah, well, here's maybe a simplified example that'll illustrate what I think, the point that you just made. If you're a speaker or a trainer, and you are one person and you're going to do a breakout, and you're going to talk for 45 or 50 minutes, you need to get people from point A to point B. And let's say you go in and you're going to talk about the 7 ways to make your lawn greener, right? So you've got 7 points in your presentation that you're going to cover, plus however you're going to handle Q&A. If you're really awesome in a live training environment, you're probably not saving all the Q&A. You're talking at people and saving all the Q&A up for the end. What you do is you facilitate along the way. But what is
Yeah.
the skill in facilitation? You've got to, you still got to get from point A to point B. You know what your time limit is, and you got your 7 points for how to make your lawn greener, right? And you have to develop the skill of knowing when to give a little, when to take a little, when to let somebody run, when to maybe even cut somebody off when they're talking too much. You've got the soft skill as the guide
Hmm.
to make that happen. Well, in some of the 3-day events that you and I do for in the continuing medical education space, they're one of their faculty is they deem a course master, and that person owns that responsibility over the course of the 3 days. So it's both what does this person do within their segment, and they've got a 75-minute segment that's going to have a certain amount of teaching and breakouts and role plays and dialogue and interaction, and then you take a break and you do the next segment or whatever. But somebody at the course master level also has that same kind of facilitation. We got to get people from point A to point B, and we know what pieces we got to get in the middle there. Now the
Yeah.
question is, how do we work with that? And sometimes the presenter goes too long because they get excited and they start talking about stuff they know and love, and next thing you know, their 40-minute segment turned into 50 minutes, and now you got to make up that 10 minutes somewhere. That's just
Yeah.
part of the game, right?
Yeah.
Start on time, end on time. Everything in the middle, you got a little flexibility. But to
Yeah.
your point, and all of this being about the run of show, you need to understand what the elements are,
Yeah.
and at least have a guesstimate of what the impact of that's going to be, right?
Right.
A
Yep.
poll could be done in 20 seconds, or a poll could have some significant discussion after that and be 4 minutes. So
Right.
what's your plan? You don't just put in poll, and depending on the nature of how you're doing it, you might put in that level so that you understand what your expectation is. That poll, we're going to have a significant amount of discussion about the results of what people put in that poll, because I'm going to have them go type stuff into chat about why they answered the way they answered or whatever that is, and realize that I
Yeah.
can't just put in the word poll when one of them's going to be 30 seconds and one of them could be 5 minutes.
Right. Right. I think another good element of a good runner show is a debrief after each day if you're doing multiple days. What did we do right? What can we improve on? And those quick meetings after the event, after say day one, can really help to propel the content and the energy for day two, and the confidence of the speakers as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. What have you seen with regard to maybe offering more than one run of show for a
Mm,
given event? And I say that in having seen a couple different ways. One, there's a different run of show for the production team versus the presentation team.
sure.
One other angle that I've seen is there's the detailed run where we have all of those things. Okay, this poll's going to be 30 seconds versus this one's going to be 5 minutes, versus maybe a skinny version of that just kind of gives you the top level overview, so you kind of catch the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Any thoughts or questions there?
Yeah, I always have two printouts. I like paper, and I have the highlighted version, the cliff notes, if you will, over here, and I've got all the details and everything I need over here. And in there, I've got contact information for every presenter, every attendee. If there's a teammate helping me produce the event, obviously we've got some communication that's outside the meeting. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that, but I think it's a great point. Get yourself a cliff note version, and then have your big version there available, so you can get the details of things, like specifically how long are we planning on talking about this poll question. I think a great example. Have fun, man. I mean, there's nothing that will help energy more than presenters laughing on camera. And
Touche.
just there, it's everybody's time. And like Roger's referencing one of our clients that does some pretty heavy duty stuff, really important work, but man, it's heavy topics. and being able to go in there and give it the seriousness that it needs, and then be able to pop back out and breathe some energy back into to your audience. Really critical. I just kind of jumped there, Roger, but you got me thinking about that company, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's really important to put that energy back in because it comes out quick.
Yeah, managing energy over time is true in any presentation context, but I think it's, yeah, particularly useful in that 3 day or multi-day. It can be one full day, but we're not talking about an hour. We're talking about a whole day, let alone 3 days, or I've seen 5 days. I did a 5 day gig last year. Managing that energy. Where does it come up? Where does it sag? Where do we need to maybe recognize what's going on in the virtual room and adjust accordingly is important. Um, Online, just like it is offline.
Sure.
Okay, here's a quick question for you. Managing communication outside of the platform. So when we were talking about run of show and how we plan that, let's talk about use of instant messaging or other tools to
hmm
chat behind the scenes with the backstage crew and presenters and all of that. Do you have a preference in terms of how that goes down?
Man, it really all depends on what you're up against, right? So I'm thinking back to some of our friends in New York. We did some events for them. These were very high level events, ambassador level type. It was
Yeah.
those
High
events were
production.
high production value. And I got a little dampness on my palm just thinking about how much work we put into those. They all went great, but one of the tools that we used is we had basically, like, I'm even forgetting the name right now, Roger. I'm sorry, but it's a walkie-talkie on your phone where we all
Unify.
had a yeah, Unify, where we all had a private channel, and I could just reach over and hit my phone and go, Roger, we don't have the video up yet, and then Roger would immediately launch into some sort of masterful delay tactic while I, got the video going and everything like that, just to keep the thing flowing. So yeah, there's Unify kind of at the high end. It's a really handy tool. Definitely anything like a WhatsApp or Messenger. Always have, I think, a good best practices. No matter if your show is 45 minutes or 4 days, get a text group together. Get that established in your pre-conference so that you can text behind the scenes completely outside of the platform. You can communicate in the platform just fine. Some are stronger platforms with that type of technology, some aren't so great, but having something outside to be able to get the critical communication is a really important best practice. I'm glad you brought that up, Roger.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's probably two things. One thing we don't see as much now as when we were in the business 20 years ago. Um,
Ooh.
yep. We used to
Different
have like
color.
use instant messaging, say just messaging on your phone, because if the platform went down, you now had everybody connected in a way that allowed you to to respond on the spot or on the fly. But you said something I don't want to pass by too quickly. Different platforms handle private messaging differently. And we can do a group chat, even just a group text message on your phone is an advance over, say, and I won't name the platform, but if I can only do a private message to Rob and I can't simultaneously private message the other presenters or the other backstage team, um, I'm minus a capability, right? Never mind the fact that if I private message Rob and now 73 other messages hit the chat box, it may scroll up and Rob might never see that. So, using an instant messaging platform, WhatsApp, your your phone, whatever, definitely a step forward
Yeah.
with regard to having that communication be really clear, if not immediate. But let's go back to Unify for a moment because I want to make sure that I have found most people don't realize what we're talking about when we're talking about something like that. So whether it's Unify, I forget if it was Unify Square or something like that, essentially turned your mobile phone into a walkie-talkie.
Mhm.
So you're listening to a channel, or you actually had multiple channels, and now you're listening on a channel where where, like a walkie-talkie, Rob or anybody else on the production team can say something. Now, yes, that seems a little weird when you're listening to the event out of one set of speakers and you got a walkie-talkie on your phone. But to Rob's point, we were doing high production stuff where we were timing things like camera switches and running a video, or spotlighting somebody like with television type precision. So we'd be running a video, and for instance, our nomenclature, or our so what I'm looking for, our standard operating procedure was like, okay, 10 seconds, radio silence, 5, 4, 3, 2, silence, bam, that switch happens, right? And so we're doing that on walkie-talkie like a television production crew,
Right.
behind the scenes, and there's no way to do that in you can't do that in WebEx or Zoom or GoTo or something like that, but there's a level of production there that's possible, and there's something kind of cool that happens when you have that level of coordination.
Yeah. Yeah, you're creating some magic there, and it's good. But hey, again, you don't have to go to the walkie-talkie for your standard events, but if you have a 20-minute event, yeah, get a little text message group together and make sure that you guys can communicate, and name the numbers if they're not people in your phone, in your book, so you know exactly who's saying what. Regardless of the length or complexity of your program, it's a good tip, I think.
All right, last question
Last
for
question.
our time together. What are tips or tricks that you've seen or used with regard to breakout rooms?
Mm. So the breakout room, I think is a challenge, because it's really important to get people into a smaller cohort so that they can really kind of practice or learn the content at a more manageable level. Let's say you have 75 people in the room. 75 people can't really have a discussion, but 5 can, 6, 7 can. And so the breakout room, I think, can be a really important tool to use, and use pretty frequently in a longer. It helps to bring a real nice dynamic aspect to the program. The challenges are that it does break the flow. So you want to put your breakouts in strategically. I'm not sure if that's where you were wanting to go with this, Roger, but if you have a plan to go into a breakout room, you need to have a plan coming out of that breakout room. And how do you bring that larger, all the individual cohorts, how do you bring that family back together? And there are definitely some tips and tricks that you can use to sort of facilitate bringing the group back together and going, okay, now we're back, guys. Let's go ahead and go to this thing. But I think you have to be very disciplined and deliberate about how you do that.
Yeah, no, you just made a killer point, because let's just use that exact thing. You're facilitating momentum. You're bringing people back from a breakout. Now what? I've seen it where it's like, all right, everybody's back, go to a break, and then we'll come back. I've seen it where you come back, and if there's 4 groups, now we can like unmute people and get on there and talk about what they talked about in terms of a debrief. Do that. Can you do that with 10 groups? Yeah, probably not, without spending a whole lot of time, in which case you might say, hey, go type your key idea into chat or something like that. But to your point, thinking through how do we keep momentum going is critical. One thing that I've found, particularly when people are just in the process of moving online, is they don't allow enough time, because they don't yet recognize the power of that peer-to-peer connection, right? So when I started working with one particular client, I counseled them right up front, hey, you got to put a breakout real early on the very first of your 3 days breakouts, because people's expectation is like passive, like a webinar. So you need to get them talking so they realize they need to be on camera. They're going to be muting and unmuting themselves, right? And you can talk about anything. What's your favorite ice cream? Doesn't make any difference. The point, and funny events is always a great one, right? What's the funniest thing that ever happened to you on a date, or well, it's crazy because people love those funny stories. Oh, one time Rob went on a date and, lost his, came out of the bathroom with some toilet paper stuck in his pants, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
But But interestingly, the very first time they ever did it was like, okay, 5 minutes, throw people in, back out, because they didn't want to lose momentum, and their brain was still around how are we going to do a bunch of content. Now that same breakout is 15 minutes, and we're less than 10 minutes into a 3-day event, and they break people out for 15 minutes to get to know each other. Why? Because they just figured out that participant A and participant B getting to know each other is as powerful a part of the program as whoever on stage is doing the talking. And it's amazing that relationship begins to form over the course of 3 days.
Yeah, that's the most critical thing right there, Roger. But just to talk about, I think in terms of practice, right? So you break them out and you do the little icebreaker, and then they've done it. Now they know exactly what to expect. And as a producer, I see it. It worked. Everybody's logged in properly. Everybody's version is up to date. I can pick out the 1 or 2 people that maybe had an issue getting transitioned into that, and then troubleshoot for them before the real content comes in, the piece that they're going to miss if they don't break out then. So I think there's some real practical reasons to do that, and then obviously some real good cultural family type event stuff reasons to do it as well.
Good point. That actually is a killer point, Rob. Yes, because at least in Zoom, I'll just use Zoom as an example, but other platforms are similar. The most bandwidth intensive thing that you're ever going to do is send somebody into a breakout, because Zoom is simultaneously trying to maintain a connection with that end user, right? So they know Rob is still in the conference. And at the same time, he's breaking Rob out and taking Rob's audio and video and putting that into another subconference that is going to, of course, be discrete with the other 5 people that go into the breakout room with Rob, right?
It's a brand new connection, right?
Right. And that process right there is the heaviest, dutiest thing that Zoom does. And oftentimes that's where people break down, because they're like, oh, I've been using this for telehealth for years, since COVID started. I've never had this kind of problems, because you've never done breakouts. You don't use breakout rooms in your typical telehealth visit or something like that. So that's a great point about just using that as a time to assess how things are working or not working for individual attendees, so that you can anticipate how you need to help them. Rob, any questions that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
No, I think we covered it. I think there's so many things, so many moving parts when you're talking about a conference of this length. But I think we covered sort of the big rocks, if you will. So I think it's good, Roger. It's always great to talk with you.
Well, mutual, and I really appreciate you taking some time to spend a little time for whoever happens to end up being the beneficiary of something like this. But one of the things that I know that at least is our heart here at Virtual Venues, and I've known you for so many years that I know it's your heart too, that we love to do good by helping others do good. And that's not Roger's line, that's Rob's line. And so if there's something that you would love to hear, you can connect with Rob at virtualeventteam.com. And of course, he does lots of work on his own for various clients, as well as doing stuff for clients with and through Virtual Venues. And you know what? Shoot us a note, because one of the things that we love to do is help people, because the business part works out if and when it makes sense for you to engage us as part of your team. And as you figured out, there's plenty of times when Rob and I are on the same team, working for the same client, doing some higher touch, higher level of engagement kind of thing, because it's just that important to pull something off in a way that's really different than your typical company meeting. So with that, Rob, thank you again for spending some time with us today, and we will see each and every one of you next time around on the next episode of Thought Leader Conversations.